You know, I appreciate creativity with the video. So it's meant to be kind of you know, show me something. The ones that do kind of a stand-up book report as if it's a verbal presentation, I don't give as high a marks, if that helps answer your question. So you can be creative. Did I see another question? Or are we good? All right. So we are in this last chapter spending more time than we had before on the labor market. What's going on? Well, I don't need it that bad, but.
Are you doing
Yeah, you know, you do it, buzz. He wants to do it here pretty quick, so maybe like.
Well, I'm not sure what's going on with the video, so it wasn't that big of a deal, but we're kind of shifting gears here with the labor market. We've spent most of the semester up here in the output market, where we're talking about chicken wings and beer and all of those sorts of things. So, what is going on with this thing here? And that's back, video mute. There we go. Trying to just take this thing off. And so now we're going to be in the downstairs. And downstairs in the labor market, or in the factor market, because it could be the market for computers or machines or land, that sort of thing. So the supply curve and the demand curve kind of switch roles. So when we look at our graph, instead of Q, we might put labor, and we might put the wage up here. And then if we think about the demand and the supply, one of the things we need to kind of flip around in our brain is that it's the businesses are now the demand curve, right? So this is the businesses that want to purchase labor hours, and the supply curve is the households. These are people who are deciding whether they want to enter the labor force or not and put in some work. And so we'll still have some sort of equilibrium amount of people working at some sort of wage. So we still have the same concepts of equilibrium going on, but we've really switched roles. And so that's one of the important things to look at as we start to do some graphs and look at other concepts. So I'm going to start off with, I think, a couple videos here. We're going to start with where we left off last time, which was the data, or some of the data on women pay versus men's pay, right? And so what is the pay gap? How much did we come up with last time? 25%? 2%, right? I actually presented both because both of them are statistics. Now, tonight's the debate. Have you guys ever heard the saying, I might have said this to you before, statistics don't lie, but liars use statistics? Statistics don't lie, but liars use statistics. So both of the candidates, you know, they have the little fact checkers that go on, tend to throw stuff out. The statistic might be correct. And so the statistic that got thrown out with the 25% pay gap of women versus men is if you take all the data and you just look at men pay versus women pay, not taking into account a number of the other factors that we saw in the video. But once we filter out some of those other effects, like possibly leaving the labor force to go care for children, for instance. If we filter out that effect, I mentioned there's been studies with single parent, no kids, women versus men, and the pay gap, you know, shrinks dramatically. So in other words, if you control for some factors that would seem, you know, reasonable, I don't know about you, but I value a parent at home with children. And we've seen this, by the way, in the men data too, with sometimes now it's fairly popular to have the guy stay at home and the woman go to work because she's got more marketable skills in the labor market, and she can bring home the bacon better than he can bring home the bacon, right? So that's very possible. You guys probably all have family members and friends that are doing that sort of thing. Both my brothers actually ended up doing that. So after we adjust for those factors, then there's a lot less of a case. There's still a little bit of a gap, and maybe there's some stuff to talk about. So all I'm bringing up is that the gap is not what some people put forth. It's not that big of a gap. Once we dig into data a little bit more, the gap starts to disappear. And I mentioned in some industries, women are actually paid higher than men. So it's not even true across all industries that that's the case. So let me play this next video from one of my favorite, well, certainly my favorite dead economist, Milton Friedman. He died. And this is him back in the 70s. He did an awesome video series called Free to Choose. And he was really educating the public on economics issues, and he would hold forums. And Jacob, why don't you switch over to there? I think you're going to be, I'll end up coming this way a little bit. He ended up talking to regular old people with regular old questions. And this is one of those pieces that were on equal pay for equal work. You can hear some of these 70s groove here. So, take out a piece of paper, take down some notes. You're going to turn this in for extra credit today, too. It's good note taking. Think about a question for Milton.
The women go around today urging equal pay for equal work are being anti-feminist. They don't intend it. But that is the effect of their policy. Because if there is any activity in which, for any reason, a male is preferable to a female, or vice versa, the only weapon the less productive sex has is to offer to work for less. And if you deny them that opportunity, you're assuring yourself that you're going to have all male jobs, or all female jobs, or all white jobs, or all black jobs.
But aren't you also yet to stay there?
Not at all. Not at all. The typical course, if you go back to American history, by taking these low-paid jobs, a great many people, not all, but a great many people were able to develop skills and activities, accumulate a little skill, a little capital, a little knowledge, improve their life, become advanced in the stage, get to a higher level of productivity, and get a higher income. That's been the typical way up the ladder for most of the people who came in. It was the way up the ladder for my parents, for your parents, or grandparents, or great-grandparents, and that's the way in which, unfortunately, there's no way in which you can immediately propel people to the top of the ladder. Okay, thanks very much.
Mr. Friedman, referring to the statements that you made about women who advocate equal pay for equal work.
Yeah, I thought I'd get a rise out of that. So why did that happen?
Yes, okay, I just would like to know if you're insinuating, or perhaps, point blankly saying that women and other minorities' skills are inferior to those of those now holding those jobs, and that they need to go through a period where those skills need to be improved and therefore deserve to be paid less?
No, I don't think desert has anything to do with it. I'm not, first of all, I think desert is an impossible thing to decide. Who deserves what? Nobody deserves anything. Thank God we don't get what we deserve. but I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying a very different thing. I'm saying that the actual effect of requiring equal pay for equal work will be the following. If women's skills are higher than men's in a particular job and are recognized to be higher, the law does not do it. Because then they will be able to compete ways and get the same income. If their skills are for whatever reason, maybe it isn't because they're saying it's their sex, maybe it's because they were out of the labor force, maybe it's for other reasons. And you say the only way you are able to hire them is by paying the same wage, then you're denying them the only weapon they have to fight. If the unwillingness of the men to hire them is because the men are sexist, what's the phrase, racist, sexist pigs or whatever, if that's the only reason they want to hire them, none the way. You want to make it costly to them to exercise their preference. If you say to them, good, You have to pay the same wage no matter whether you pay hire women or here's Mr. Sexist. It doesn't cost you anything to hire men instead of women. However, if the women are free to compete, and to say, well, now look, I'll offer my work for less. Then he can only hire men if he bears a cost. If the women are really as good as he is, then he's paying a price for discriminating. What you are doing, not intentionally, but by misunderstanding. When you're trying to get equal pay for equal work, this is what you are doing, is reducing the cost imposed on people who are discriminating for irrelevant reasons. And I would like to see a cost imposed on them. I'm on your side, but you're not.
All right, come up with your question for Dr. Friedman. I'm on your side, but you're not. Another great quote. Yeah, I'd like a question for Dr. Friedman. I just wanted you to take notes so that you had that, but I'm going to have you turn these in. Lance, if you want, you can turn it in late for 20% off if you want. Watch the video. I'll tell you what the video is. See me after class. All right. I'll give it another 10, 15 seconds here. I'll start collecting them. And all right, all right. All right, so you guys pass them up. Those of you who haven't gotten quite done here, pass them forward. All right, so first of all, let's make sure, what was that last comment there on how he thought the businesses, without having some sort of law, were actually being penalized already? That was kind of a not so easy one to digest. Last call for papers, by the way. Any other ones will be late. Anybody? Good? Got them all?
Because if I do the same job as and I do just as well as he does, you're only paying me $5, you pay him 10, you're losing $5.
Right, right. So there's potentially a double whammy there, right? So if the wage is, let's just call it $20 is the equilibrium wage, and that is for those sorts of skills. If we have two equally skilled people, then you're overlooking a bargain if women workers could be hired at a lower pay but have the same skills. That's a deal, right? And so in a sense, the sexist pig is paying for his sexism by paying more by only willing to be able to pay workers. On the flip side is if they're overlooking, if women are more highly skilled and the wage is 20 and the going rate is 20, for instance, but again, you don't choose to hire a woman because you're a sexist pig, then you're incurring a cost because you could have picked up a woman who was more highly skilled than the man at 20, but chose not to. So implicitly, you're paying a price as part of what that argument was. All right, questions? Yeah.
So if it came down to having to fire someone and they really need to save money, would they fire the men first?
If they weren't sexist.
Yeah.
Yeah, but otherwise, I mean, that's a good way to look at it, is if they were sexist and had a preference for men, then they're letting go of a more highly skilled person, right? And so then they're really paying the price. So in other words, his argument was that in the free market system, there are prices being paid. There's a cost being incurred. I don't think it's the full argument for it, but that was part of what he was bringing up. Maybe there's other ways to tackle things. Remember, he was specifically tackling whether a policy of a government outsider saying dictating equal pay for equal work would be the right way to tackle the problem. So I don't think Milton was necessarily denying that there's racism or sexism or whatever. He wasn't trying to say that. He was just saying that that maybe wouldn't be the best policy to try to get at the issue. Okay, other questions that you had on your sheets? All right, so we'll talk a little bit more about, we'll kind of tease out some of those stuff. Let's get into a little bit of the mechanics here. So we've got two cases that we're going to look at in the resource market. And we can look at this and think about consumer surplus and producer surplus and how that ties into opportunity cost. So, in the labor market, there is something similar to producer surplus, but we don't call it that. Producer surplus, which we have talked a lot about. And it's called economic rent, which I think was brought up maybe in one of our videos, economic rent. We call it that because now we're talking about resources. Remember, their roles have flipped here on the business side. And so the supply curve now is our households. And so what this is saying is that in order to hire the 100th worker, the 100th worker was willing to work, willing to supply their labor at, let's call it, I guess I pretty much picked in the middle here, $10 an hour, right? They were willing to work for $10 an hour, but they actually got paid 20. And so this red distance represents kind of like producer surplus, but now in this chapter, it's called economic rent. So this whole triangular region, similar to what we saw with the output market, is called economic rent. And economic rent is a payment above opportunity cost. A payment above their opportunity cost. All right, then this section then says, if the 100th worker wasn't doing what they're doing, their next best alternative was something that paid $10, right? So the height here represents opportunity cost. And so this area represents opportunity cost. Now that area we didn't always highlight before. It was the marginal cost when we had hamburgers measured down here. That area was the marginal cost. But now we're kind of thinking about it in terms of, well, what else could these resources be doing? And so the total pay for the 100th worker, so the key point here is that, so example, the 100th unit of labor is paid this way, $20, which is equal to $10 of opportunity cost plus $10 of economic rent. So this is their total pay, which was the market rate, right? The equilibrium pay was $20. And for that particular worker, that represented an opportunity cost of 10, and then it just happened to be that it was economic rent of 10. All right, so we can look at a couple extreme cases where we've got a supply curve that looks like that, perfectly elastic, right? Perfectly flat, or perfectly inelastic, looks like an eye. So if we currently have a demand curve, I don't know, this demand curve could be anywhere, by the way, if just put a demand curve anywhere on your paper. The supply curve intersects the demand curve at this amount of labor. And this is, of course, the wage. And over here, we've got this wage and this amount of labor. My question to you is, which one is LeBron James and which one is the worker at McDonald's? Which one's which? We'll call this one left and right, right? So picture to the left, picture to the right. Which one's LeBron James? Notice I'm not going to help you out by putting 20 million on one of these lines here, or that's probably understating LeBron James, but, right? Which one's LeBron James? Which one is the McDonald's worker? LeBron James is on the right. Why do you say that? Okay, so you're kind of going off that part of it, which I'd agree with you. You're going to pay him a lot no matter what. It's kind of, there's a wide range of things that would allow him to do that. That's one way to think about it. Okay? Other people thinking this one? No? Another way to say this is who's got economic rent versus who's got opportunity costs. Which worker has a higher economic rent? In other words, think about LeBron's next best alternative as opposed to being the star of the Cavaliers. If LeBron James wasn't playing basketball, what would he be doing? Tight end, yeah, he might have some opportunities. Do you think he'd be paid as much as basketball? I don't know, it's hard to say, but he might be banged up a little bit more. But so, Ty, what else might LeBron James do? What do some of these athletes do, especially the star ones? Advertisements, right? So, but he's doing advertisements now too. So, what's that? A commentator might be a one that would be pretty popular. Now, how does that compare to being in his prime, playing for the Cavaliers, the pay for being a commentator? And I know you guys don't know commentator pay. I don't either. But what's your gut feeling? Substantially less, right? Substantially less. So if LeBron's pulling down 20, 36 million, I don't know what he is, after he retires, some of those advertising deals wash up a little bit too, right? When you're not in your prime, as far as Nike, you know, the number of endorsements and stuff for retired people, so that starts to decline. So which one's LeBron James thinking about that? Does LeBron James have a lot of economic rent or high opportunity cost? High opportunity cost? So there's lots of other opportunities that he could be doing? No, right? So he's got a lot of economic rent. His next best alternative is substantially less pay. And so this is LeBron James here off to the right with his big pay. Most of this is all, whoops, I wanted to kind of keep this color coded for you, although you probably don't have colors anyway. I was trying to go with this thing. This is all economic rent. Whereas our McDonald's worker has zero economic rent, payments above and beyond their opportunity costs. In other words, they could go work at Burger King or other places and get probably the same pay, right? So on the flip side, you can think about you being McDonald's. McDonald's can hire about as many people as they want at $8 an hour or whatever, maybe closer to whatever minimum wage might be perhaps or whatever. They can hire a lot of, the labor pool is high, so they can hire as many people as they want at $8 an hour. LeBron's next best alternative isn't very good. So this is all economic rent. I'm sorry, this is all opportunity cost for our McDonald's worker. And it becomes extra easy, I think, once you do a little golf club trick over here. And oops, I need to go with the supply curve. If I start to make the supply curve more elastic and flatten it, you can almost see the green area start to get bigger, right? And so if I make it more inelastic, the red area starts to get bigger. So those are some of the things we're thinking about in the labor market. Another interesting aspect of the labor market, does anybody have any questions or comments there? There's something called a backward bending labor supply. And it looks like this. If we look at some real world data, the labor supply curve tends to be upward sloping, but then backs off on itself. So a backward bending labor supply curve is what we observe in some labor markets. And so what do you think's going on here with a backward bending labor supply curve? Maybe it's better to think about this being a person working the number of hours. If this was an individual person's labor. And so maybe this is at 40 hours a week. See, because this is where it gets kind of weird with this backward bending thing, is that means, well, wait a second, do I get to choose that? At 40 hours, what are we getting at here that might go on in certain labor markets? Okay. Yeah, less hours for more pay if they get into another position down the road, right? So, in other words, these battling effects going on that I'm willing to work more hours if I get more pay, but then I'm not seeing my family, I'm not seeing my kids, and if I was paid more, I might choose to take some of my utility in the form of leisure. In other words, hours of time spent with my family is more important maybe than another hour of work. And so some of these effects get in there on the labor market, certain types of positions. And so that's why we get an effect like this. And so what it calls to our attention is the time constraint, which we haven't talked about before. We talked about budget constraints with utility, where I only have $100, how much beer, how much pizza am I going to buy, right? I have a budget. So a budget constraint was I've only got a certain amount of income, what am I going to spend my income on? But what's our time constraint? What's our time constraint? So budget constraint, I'm making $10,000 a year or $10,000 a month, let's make me rich rather than poor. $10,000 a month. What would be what's everybody's time constraint? 24 hours, 365 days a year. You know, it doesn't matter what your skill set is, right? It doesn't matter what you're worth in the market. We all face the same time constraint, which kind of makes labor markets kind of interesting. It brings in this other dimension. So with the time constraint, we've got 24 hours a day perhaps, and we can allocate that. Labor economists kind of lump them into two categories: labor hours plus leisure hours. So we tend to reserve the word leisure for whatever you choose to do otherwise. You know, obviously every human has to sleep at some point. So sometimes when you do studies, you might suck out some amount of sleep out of there. But I've heard Donald Trump is, for the longest time, and I've heard it mentioned in this campaign, but I heard it a long time ago too, that he's able to get away with just sleeping for 4 hours a night or whatever. So some people sleep for 4, some people, you know, the suggested amount is around 8. I tried to do 8 myself. I've learned over the years. I tried to do less, and I don't think it's worth it. So we make these choices of labor hours versus leisure hours. And so what this highlights for us is that if we choose to work a 10-hour day, the time constraint tells us it leaves me with 14 hours here, right? And so it brings in this valuation of non-market work, spending time with the kids, spending time with the family or whatever. How do we value that stuff? And so we might get some effects like that. All right, questions or comments there? And that's where we get into utility business a little bit more too, because of the time. All right, so where does the demand for labor come from? I guess before I do that, let me. We'll start with that. The demand for labor. All right, who's demanding labor again? Is it the businesses or the households? Households? Businesses, right? It's hard sometimes. You got to keep flipping that around. So here's let's just see if this makes sense. Does this make sense? Because it might not later, but I'm going to hopefully give you something that you can hang your hat on. A firm should hire another worker if the revenue generated by that worker, a firm should hire another worker if the revenue generated by that worker is greater than the costs associated with that worker. A firm should hire another worker if the revenue generated by that worker is greater than the costs associated with that worker. Does that make sense? Yeah, right? So recall, our firm is out to maximize profits. Profits, we haven't done this for a while. Gosh, I hope you guys remember this part. What's our profit equation, goggles? Total revenue minus total cost. And so this just falls right in line with profit maximization, right? Hey, I should hire this extra person if I'm thinking they're going to generate more revenue than they cost. That would be a smart thing to do. And so if you wanted to put in a couple extra words, I didn't want to muddy them up at the time, but I should hire another worker if the expected revenue generated by that worker is greater than the cost, and it might be expected cost there. We're right back to this whole class and the economic way of thinking of marginal analysis. Should I hire an extra person? Should I not hire an extra person? All right, so how does that shape up graphically? Well, let's take a look. So if we have a graph here and we think about the production process, and how can we capture what's going on here? So the value of the marginal product curve is one that helps us digest the parts. So the VMP curve, the value of marginal product. Who remembers what marginal product was way back when, chapter 11 probably? Marginal product. You had to give a definition for that, which remember you can keep your one page of notes, you can add that on for your final, so you can keep adding on to the note page. No words, remember, just acronyms, just equations. Something equals something. Marginal product? From the next person, yeah, that's right. So if I add another person to my restaurant line, this was when I had my grill top and we were talking about adding another worker, how many more hamburgers do I get? Right? The additional amount of hamburgers. And now we're going to value that, value those hamburgers. And so the value of the marginal product, the VMP curve, is the change in total revenue from an additional unit of a resource in general. Could be a worker, but it could be a computer. Change in total revenue from an additional unit of a resource. All right. So our value of marginal product curve is equal to our marginal revenue. The revenue generate, oh yeah, I should ask you that. So you just did marginal product, Ashley, nice. Can somebody tell me marginal revenue? Okay, the next no, not the next person. So marginal revenue. Now this goes way back to before that time frame. Well, that's not true. I guess marginal revenue was really brought in after that, chapter 12. From one additional unit of a product, yeah. So actually, the one with marginal product was the additional amount of hamburgers from an additional person. Marginal revenue is the additional amount of dollars revenue from an additional hamburger, right? So marginal revenue times marginal product, and let's just say labor just to keep things easy, that's your new equation for this chapter. And something kind of cool I think works out here, putting on your equation goggles to one more level. Marginal revenue was the change in total revenue from a change in hamburgers, right? Same old definition we did along many times before. Change in total revenue or change in quantity times marginal product, which is the change in hamburgers from a change in labor. Now, as we look at that equation, the Q's cancel out, right? Delta Q, same thing mathematically, just kind of put a little X through them. And you basically got your definition here of the revenue generated by another person. Hire that person if the revenue generated by him or her is, or look at the revenue generated by the other person. We're not actually at the cost part yet. Okay, questions there? So look at the definition, change in total revenue from an additional unit of a resource. This is the mechanics of that. Note, there are two cases. Number one, in perfect competition. This is where I kind of give the reminder, this last class is not going to be, the next test is not comprehensive in nature, but the whole class kind of builds on itself. In perfect competition, what was true about marginal revenue? The revenue generated by another hamburger. It was something kind of unique. Perfect competition, when you start getting little visions of this, you're like, no, I don't, Russ, this is crazy, you're being crazy, crazy, crazy. Little Q, Farmer Tom, the market. What was going on with revenue, in marginal revenue in perfect competition? It was constant, good. It was the same as the, nope, not the quantity. Same as demand, yes, which was equal to the, you guys are on the right track here. What is this? The price, the market price, right? So the market price generated what you said, that's demand, that's marginal revenue. In other words, if price was $5, demand was $5, marginal revenue was $5, it's constant. So in perfect competition, price equals marginal revenue. You're going to see some homework or test problems. So remember that little thing. The problem will say something like, suppose the apple farmer is operating in perfect competition and blah, 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 blah. They're going to expect you to know this little trick here, that the price and the marginal revenue, applying it to this. So if that's true, if we're operating in perfect competition, then the value of the marginal product equation can look like this. Price times marginal product of labor, right? Because we're just making this substitution. The second case would just be all the other market structures. So other market structures, we got the value of the market, the same thing we just did above. Marginal revenue times marginal product of labor. Then you'll have, that'll usually be given to you, although you could be given a graph or something that shows marginal revenue. Okay, but you'll definitely see this. This is used more common. They'll just say, suppose the firm is operating in perfect competition. Okay, questions there? All right. We also have, I'm going to start here. Kind of want to keep my little graph going there, even though I don't think I maybe need to. The marginal resource cost curve, the MRC curve, marginal resource cost. The MRC, the marginal resource cost curve, now notice all we're doing, marginal cost curve was the cost of an additional hamburger. Now we're just saying, well, what does it cost for an extra worker, right? The marginal resource cost. So marginal resource cost is the change in total cost from an additional unit of a resource. The change in total cost from an additional unit of a resource. Okay, this has two cases. The company could be a marginal resource price taker. MRC, marginal resource cost price taker. Now again, this is all kind of review, right? We had the price taker, price maker language before. This is the first case, sorry. This is the new two cases of the marginal resource cost. So case number one is a marginal resource price taker, and that basically means the firm can hire as many workers as it wants at the market rate. So firm can hire as many workers as it wishes at the market rate. Firm can hire as many workers as it wishes at the market rate. So if we have low-skilled workers, and there's a demand, these would be our workers at McDonald's and Burger King, fast food restaurants, the shopping, retail places, running the cash register. There's some skill there. It's not no skill, it's low skill. We can teach different people to do those sorts of jobs. If that turns out to be $8 an hour, and there is 100 million people that are, maybe that's a little bit strong, maybe we should just have 1 million people in Kansas City, in the Kansas City metro area. If there's 1 million people, there's 1 million people working at basically these $8 low skill type jobs. So the representative firm might be McDonald's or some other company, right? So Mickey D's. If that's the situation, then the marginal resource cost curve, the MRC curve, is flat at the market rate. Same looking graph that I kind of scribbled up here, but remember this was in the corn market. This was the output market. Now we're looking at the market for labor. And these are wages potentially. Okay, questions on that one? All right, our second case, I think I will get rid of this. We'll come, you guys have it now, so we can come back to that. Case number 2 is a resource price maker. An MRC price maker. And in this case, oh, by the way, I wanted to add one more thing over here, sorry. The marginal resource cost curve ends up being the supply of labor. Back to our McDonald's worker that I did earlier with that other graph. The supply of workers is perfectly elastic, creating, I can hire as many people as I want at $8 an hour. All right, with a resource price maker, the key is that the firm faces an upward sloping supply curve. So in this case, our company faces an upward sloping supply curve. So this might be the market for nurses in, who's from a smaller town, rural-ish area in Kansas, some city. Dylan, where are you from? Where? Holton. So Holton, nurses in the area of Holton, Kansas. Now, how many hospitals, large hospitals, do you have near Holton? Just one, right? So when Holton, what's the name of the hospital? Holton Community Hospital. When they go to the market to buy nursing labor, right? They're facing the whole market supply curve, right? All of the people in that, I bet they drive from an hour away at least. There's probably a few nurses that might even drive further than that to go to work every day, but probably a decent amount of people driving within an hour that are trained nurses. So Holton Community Hospital is the only buyer of nurses in the area. what economists call a monopsony. Monopsony. I am going to get rid of this one. I'll come back to that one later. What the heck? Get rid of this. So we learned monopoly. Monopoly was a single what? A single producer, a single seller, right? A monopsony is a single buyer. In other words, they have buying power, if you will. So they have buying power. All right, so let's just say that we've got 3 nurses currently employed in Holton at $50,000. Let me go hourly. Currently making, I don't know, $27 an hour. Okay? Might be a little light, but sometimes in the smaller towns there's a little bit less. Not always though. They're desperate for good help too. So if there's currently 3 nurses being hired and Holton is expanding and they need to hire 4, and they think about it and they're like, geez, we really need to get up to $30 to get that person to drive all the way to Holton, because it looks like they've got a good hour-plus commute, right? That's what the market dictates to the hospital, is that they need to pay $30 to get 4 to work for them. What is the marginal resource cost of the 4th nurse? $30? $3. Marginal resource cost, $3? No. So the cost, so look at your marginal resource cost, which I've erased already here. Marginal resource cost definition. Somebody read it off for me. Change in total cost for an additional unit of labor. So how much did cost go up by now that I need 4 nurses instead of 3? 30. Assuming that there's no, I don't even know if I should do this, but it's kind of cute. Assuming that there's equal pay for equal work, what is that 4th nurse going to cost? 30 is too low. 39. In order to attract 4 nurses to my hospital, I have to pay the previous 3 the $3 as well. Because those nurses aren't any less productive than the previous ones, they were just there first. And so if we think about how much that extra person runs, it's more than just the pay. The pay is this area. This was the $30 that you guys were saying, right? So 1 person times 30, I get it. I'm going to pay the 4th nurse 30. But the problem is I need to bump up my previous nurses by $3 as well. So 3 times 3 is 9. So the 4th nurse actually cost me not 30, but $39. And so this is 1 point on the marginal resource cost curve. The marginal resource cost curve lies above the supply curve in monopsony. So you could also add on to here, this is, and what we're doing here is we're saying there's no wage discrimination allowed, is one way to think about it, I guess. But we're really just saying the nurses are equally skilled, and so market forces, because if we don't pay the others that, they're going to leave, right? So market forces You can argue, well, there's nothing else in Holton, which is true. So we get into those things. But ultimately, if there's just kind of one wage rate, then that's going to be what they're facing, the 30. All right, questions there so far? All right. Now, if the demand for labor, now I'm going to kind of cheat a little bit just to give you, if the demand for labor looks like this, if the demand for labor looks like that, what's going to be our result in the market? So we got simple things going on. Demand equals supply here. Marginal resource cost. What is the demand for nurses? What is the demand for nurses? Before, so we got 4 here, but in general, how does the hospital think about how much they're willing to pay nurses? How much they're worth, how much they're bringing in, right? The value of the marginal product. So the demand curve is the value of the VMP curve, the value of the marginal product. It really reflects the marginal benefit. Remember in the output market, the quantity of beer in the output, the demand reflects the benefit that you're getting from each additional glass of beer, right? So this is demand equals marginal benefit. The value to the company of the 4th nurse is $30. All right, so that is that. Now, why is it downward sloping? We're kind of taking a little pause here. Why is VMP downward sloping? So I'm going to rewrite the definition or the formula here. VMP equals marginal revenue times marginal product. I think I heard a little fuzz, but a little static over there somewhere, but that's all right. Value of marginal product. Why is it downward sloping? Why is the value, oh, Russ, that's not true. The value of the human life, everybody's equal. Not the value of the marginal product. And I even told you all 4 nurses might be equally skilled, but the fact that one comes after the other makes a difference. So why is it downward sloping? Don't worry about the spending part. Don't worry about the cost part. I'm thinking about the benefit, the value of each additional nurse. Okay.
It only takes so many nurses to take care of them.
Yeah, that's part of it, right? So the value goes down. So what happens to the productivity of each additional nurse? They do less, right? So the law of diminishing marginal product, yes. The law of diminishing marginal product. This equation right here says that as we hire more and more people, the law of diminishing marginal product assures us that this piece is going down. Additional nurses are going to be less productive. Even if they're equally skilled, as I add more and more nurses, as Ashley was saying, I can only have so many people help this one patient, right? Add another nurse. Oh, we're going to make you extra well, right? The productivity of those nurses falls. Law of diminishing marginal product, one of those top principles of economics that hopefully you pull away from this course with. The law of diminishing marginal product assures that this thing's going to be downward sloping. Even if we're in a competitive market where the price is fixed, this one assures that it's going to be going down. So why is the value, this will be a good question for you on maybe a test or homework. Why is the value of marginal product downward sloping? Because of the law of diminishing marginal product. The law of diminishing marginal product means that's going to be going down. All right, so back to our picture here. if I'm this hospital, how many nurses am I hiring? 4? Or supply equals demand. 4. How many people say 4? Show of hands. Okay, majority maybe. Kind of a lot of non-hands up. I don't know if you guys are sleeping or not, or what's going on there. Any other suggestions? 3. Especially since there's only 2 numbers up there. I stacked the deck here. Kendra, why are you saying 3? Just because it was the only other number, or you got something for me? It doesn't pay as much. Okay, well that could be part of it. Go back to your does this make sense statement. Look at that. Does this make sense? A firm should hire, look back in your papers for real. A firm should hire an additional worker as long as what? The benefit of that worker is greater than or equal to the cost of that worker. How many workers am I going to hire? 3. The cost of the third worker is this amount. The cost of the third worker is whatever this turns out to be. I don't know, 33, I guess, if we're doing something linear. $33. The benefit of the third worker, by the way, is $33. So they're just doing that does this make sense statement. An extra worker will be hired if the value of their marginal product is at least as much as the cost associated with that additional worker. Okay, how much are they going to pay them? Pay them in general. They're worth 33.
Everybody?
Yeah. 39. Jump up to 39. Bonus time. What wage would the firm pay? 27. Why? Why 27? It's the price that they're willing to work for, right? If they want to hire 3 nurses, then the wage that they pay them is 27. If they advertise $27, they're going to get 3 nurses, right? So they determine the quantity of nurses by all these other factors. The fact that we have marginal resource cost higher. The value of the marginal product is here, but the wage is going to be here. So the wage is here. If you want, you can note that the VMP equals the MRC up here, which makes them appear kind of evil, but not when you really understand what's going on. The third nurse brought in marginal value of $33. The second nurse brought in that much too. The third nurse too. So in terms of their pay, it looks like they're screwing them over. But what's not being reflected is that they would have been paid less if there wouldn't have been more, right? So the cost associated with each additional nurse was going up. And that's what drove this result. But in these power situations for the buyer, the hospital's in the power position, it kind of comes off unfair looking because each of the nurses is bringing benefit to the hospital, value to the hospital of at least 33, but they're only getting paid 27. But that's the dynamic that goes on with monopsony. By the way, it's very similar to what we had with monopoly, that our market, let's call it LM, the market quantity of labor is here. Supply equals demand here. Marginal social benefit, all of that jazz. The allocatively efficient quantities here. And so we kind of get an underproduction in a situation where the buyer has some market power, monopsony. All right, questions there? How do you feel about sweatshop labor?
And
Good or bad? Sweatshops, another country. Kind of related to this that I want to make sure I announce. I'm going to be sending out an email today or tomorrow. I'm interested in poverty issues, and so I've been holding some book clubs and stuff at my house over time. Ashley, you've been there before. I'm going to do something different this semester. I'm going to hold a video series. There's just like 6 of these videos, and we're going to do it over lunch. So since we're done with this class, although it doesn't interfere with this class, because it's going to be on Tuesdays at 11:30, and I live just a couple blocks from campus, and we're going to watch a video, eat some sandwiches in my living room, and talk about poverty. So that's some grant money that I got for some research that I'm doing in poverty, and so one of those things I wanted to do was have that type of thing. So you all are invited to that. Once you see the email, if you're interested, just RSVP. There's no extra credit. There's nothing associated with this. It's on your free will. But if you're interested in poverty issues, that one's especially going to focus on global poverty. Then you're welcome to come along. So keep your eyes out for the email. So let's see here. Sweatshops. Let's take a look at this one here.
How do you feel about sweatshops? There are a lot of young Americans who want to rid the world of them. They're demanding that rules be passed to improve workers' lives. So who can say, give me a break to that? John, of course.
Of course. And I do, Barbara, because rules that in theory will make work better, in reality can make work disappear. Last month, there were big protests in Cancun, Mexico, during the meeting of the World Trade Organization. They always protest, wherever this meeting is held. And protests are being supported by increasing numbers of American students who say workers are being mistreated. Sweatshops are what they object to most. Factories like this one in Bangladesh, where adolescent girls make sweaters and are paid a fraction of American wages. The protesters seem to be winning the battle of public opinion. In 1996, made Kathy Lee Gifford cry by saying she was exploiting these young workers in Honduras who made her clothing line.
I'm supposed to be personally responsible for everything that happens around the world in Honduras.
Yes, say protesters like these. Within weeks, Kathy Lee was admitting the error of her ways. She joined President Clinton at the White House and she renounced the mistakes of her past.
That was one glass of one man too many.
The student groups who protest get some funding from labor unions. The Steelworkers Union lets one group use part of their offices in Washington, D.C. Maybe that's why students are also upset about wages in America. This group once took over the office of Harvard's president and held it for 3 weeks, demanding higher wages for workers at the school. Their supporters camped outside, and even big-time actors, Matt Damon and Ben Affleck, showed up to give their support. Senator Ted Kennedy came out and shook the students' hand. One of the leaders of this protest was Ben McKean. He assembled this group of student leaders to tell us what they're upset about.
The workers themselves have come to us and said, you benefit from our exploitation, give us back something.
And if we can tell the corporations that we don't want to buy products that are being made by people that they're able to exploit, then we can really help to end some of the serious problems affecting these people's lives.
Oh, that sounds very nice, except when we talk to some people who live in the places where the workers are supposedly being exploited in sweatshops, we heard a different story.
I wish these people would begin to think with their brains rather than with their hearts. Vivek Roy, an economist who lives in India, we interviewed him and his other supporters of globalization as they were on their way to Cancun.
I don't understand the expression sweatshops. There's nothing wrong with sweat. Sweat is good. Sweat is what most people in the developing world, including India, do all of the time.
People get jobs in these places, their generation lives better than their parents lived.
Shooter Lunga studies trade policy. She lives in Kenya.
Doesn't the United States have a responsibility to stop these companies from exploiting people in your country?
Exploiting people? Nobody in my country thinks about companies exploiting them. When there's a new company opening a factory, people are excited about it.
Arunga and DeBroy point out that in poor countries, the Nike factories that well-fed American students call sweatshops routinely pay twice what local factories pay, more than triple what people earn doing much harder and more dangerous work in the fields.
I wish we would have more sweatshops, quote unquote, in my country.
Most economists say what many Americans call sweatshops are what allowed people in now thriving places like South Korea, Taiwan, Hong Kong to pull themselves out of poverty. People started in the sweatshops, but then they go on to better jobs.
Most of them work for these companies for a while, go off and start their own businesses. It's a win-win situation for everyone.
And that, she says, is why the students who protest are ignorant and clueless.
They have no idea what they're talking about. They're comparing that to what they have in their rich homes.
They call people like you ignorant and clueless. Rich, ignorant, and clueless.
The image that we have as being rich and clueless and just idealist college students is a false one. Do I have a vision of how I want the world to be? Sure, of course I do. I want the world to be one where people don't have to struggle to feed their children. The workers are forced to migrate into the city or into places where factories like these exist.
Who's forcing them? They travel to the factory. They choose to work there.
I mean, you would prefer eating to not eating.
Sure, but if you insist on higher wages, some of these factories will close. You're going to put people out of work.
We're not trying to close down the sweatshops. We're trying to change sweatshops.
I mean, you say you're not, but that's the result of the protest. Some places will close. They'll go where the wages are lower.
The goal is to raise the wages across the board.
The protesters say that they want to keep away jobs. They just want to make them better.
By passing laws trying to improve the jobs by force, they will get rid of the jobs.
After the protests against Kathy Lee's clothing line, Walmart withdrew its Kathy Lee contract from a New York factory, taking work away from these workers. American complaints about child labor persuaded factories in Bangladesh to stop hiring adolescents. The result, according to UNICEF, is that many of the young girls turned to prostitution instead. These protests help poor people? Give me a break.
All right. So comments on that? What's that? Yeah, I probably did. Yeah, I think we did do that. The stuff next to it. Yeah. Okay, so sometimes imputing our value system overseas might have some unintended consequences. And I've seen other documentaries and stuff that they mentioned it at the end there of the most common thing for women and young, like, teenagers is prostitution in those countries. So it's like, hell, work at a sweatshop or prostitution. So by fighting the sweatshops and fighting that, and if they close down and leave, that's not an ideal situation to be putting people into. So allow some free choice. But what do you think? Yeah, Carol.
Is there a case if like they said, it don't have to be brought it back out of poverty? So
yes.
So there is a chance that the price for wages will go up.
Yes, absolutely. So it's a slower progress, right? So and that gets into economic development. So sweatshops go in, more companies come in. When more companies come in and the labor pool starts to dry up, right? They can't find as many workers. Come work for my place. I'll pay you a little bit more. Then competitions to go in, right? Because there's not an unlimited labor pool. And as they potentially start to develop skills or whatnot, so a lot of these countries, yeah, the wages are there just temporarily. Once we start to have an economy start to develop and incomes, now that person is generating an income, they go run to the store and buy clothing or buy other things from another vendor, right? And so that's the whole economic growth argument, yes. All right, so let's look at minimum wage here. This is a hot button. So minimum wage, we talked about it already, but now hopefully it's taking on a little bit more meaning for you in this chapter. So again, we could think about the supply and demand for the low-skilled jobs, perhaps. And if those jobs would currently be at, oh, I don't know, $6 an hour, let's say, under a free market, we'd have this many people working. If we say, oh, the wage is way too low, let's raise it to $15 an hour, or let's raise it to $7.30. What is it now? $7.25, right? So $7.25 is right in here. So at $7.25, let me change colors. It is a price floor. That is the minimum wage. So at that level, the demand curve is the value of their marginal product curve, right? So now putting a little more meat on the bones, the business is just looking at the contribution that each additional worker gives. How much revenue do you generate for me, for my business, in my efforts to maximize profits? And if they're forced to pay $7.25, then they're going to cut back, because the marginal resource cost curve now is down here at this flat. I can hire as many people as I want at $7.25, and so they're going to back off and hire, let's call it L2 amount of workers. Now, the other thing that comes about is that if the minimum wage is above the market price, a lot more people want to work at it. Like, hey, I'll work at that rate. And so this is the quantity of labor supplied, right? This is the amount that people want to work. So it's the quantity supplied. Let's call this L3 here. This is the quantity supplied. That's how many people want to work but aren't working. This is how many people are being hired. And so that's our unemployment that we get. Now, some people argue that if the demand for low-skilled workers or the supply of low-skilled workers is different than what it is, then the unemployment looks a lot different. Well, they have to have somebody to cook those hamburgers, and so if the demand curve looks like this, nobody loses their job. No reasonable economist believes that, by the way. Some of them do argue that, which is true in the short run, but as Ike saw, in the longer run, we start to look for automation, right? We start to get, so maybe the very short run, like if the law passed tomorrow and went up, of course we can't adjust that quickly. But over time, we learned that the elasticity of demand and supply is determined by time. As we allow more time, they're going to eagerly start to seek labor substituting innovation. And so that might end up being here. So if this is the longer run, we definitely have some loss of employment. And so that's the effects. Now, what are some other things people say? What is the wage rate that's being proposed today that's in the headlines? 15. 725 up to 15. Now, it's not fair for me to use these generic curves, but for sure, you guys as principals of economics students with hopefully a passing grade in here, although there's maybe a couple of questionable people, but we won't name any names, what's going to happen to employment? It's going down. It has to. There's no way they're going to, again, in the short run, they might have to pay that 15, but over the longer period of time, there's certainly going to be some people losing jobs if we continue. Now, if we want to do something creative, if we want to help poor people, what other ways could we do it besides just raising the minimum wage? What are some alternative policies that might keep people employed and being helped if we agree on a number? What are some other government tools at our disposal? Subsidies would be one thing. Now, what have you heard about with an increase in welfare payments and the incentives to work? What are some issues with welfare that maybe you've seen this in families? Some people, second cousins, you make less if you work, right? It's what they call cliff effects. In other words, I'm on the government handouts right now, and if I go to work, perversely enough, I actually get paid less. So now I'm working and I get paid less. And as an economist, I'm looking at you saying, stay on the government dole. That's completely understandable. But if we want to have a real discussion about how we can help the poor, this is terrible. Terrible to put people who are on the low income scale anyway and put them out of work does not make one bit of sense to me. Now, I think we could, if we needed to agree on some level, you know, why not just pay it to them in cash? What if we had a system where we paid, instead of the $725, we paid $775 of a subsidy for that? That might sound familiar, kind of like that target price program we looked, the deficiency payment, right? So as you work, if we somehow, and again, I'm not saying this is the best looking policy, but maybe we could pay the difference between the two, and that would get kind of hairy. But maybe what I'm trying to do is keep up the incentive to work. All right, questions so far? All right, so minimum wage, if I haven't said it already, is the dumbest idea that I could even possibly imagine. Now, I would get some resistance for this thing I'm going to propose to you, that I'm willing to take your assault of how bad idea this is. What if we just gave people money? There's a policy out there called the guaranteed income. Guaranteed income plan. And this was put forth here recently. This economist, Charles Murray, brought this up. Here's what he's thinking. Every U.S. citizen gets $13,000. Every single American gets $13,000. Number two, $3,000 goes to health insurance, so that we're not breaking our own law. All right, so really they're going to net 10, but every American will for sure have insurance because we're going to skim that off the top. So that means each gets $10,000 after insurance, right? What do you think if we had something like that? They don't have to work for it under this plan. No work. Let's just give people money. Yeah, so you can have another job. Yes, that's right. So everybody gets it. Warren Buffett gets it. Bill Gates gets it. Every American gets this check. Where does it come from? Oh, thank you. That turns out this is a pretty expensive program so far of what we got. All right, so let me add on a little more detail. So you're on the right track though, thinking about the right thing. So in addition to this, no taxes on the first $30,000 of income. No taxes on the first $30,000 of income. So basically, you could have $40,000 of spendable money without paying any tax.
So does this mean like have like a 2-year-old child, they're getting $10,000 too?
Yes. So there's some limits on. No, this is for work. You do have to be up to a working age. I take that back. Yeah, because we don't have an incentive to just crank out kids and make $10,000 per kid.
But I thought that $13,000 in that So then you wouldn't be making 40,000. You'd make,
Well, you'd have 40,000 of spendable money because you'd go out and work, but there's no taxes that you're making on getting your part-time job or whatever. Now, here's the catch. No minimum wage, although I think he says minimum wage. No minimum wage. No Social Security. No Medicaid. No welfare. No nothing. Now think about this. These are by the way, the problems that we're having with some things on these transfer payments that I've mentioned a couple times. Basically, this system would replace that system. And what's interesting about it is to think, how would this change people's perceptions when you find somebody in poverty and you want to help them? You know that they're getting this. Does that change the complexion of poverty alleviation? You bet it does, right? All of a sudden there's a lot higher level. We don't have to go through, well, are you on food stamps? Are you on welfare? Are you on Social Security? Are you this? Every American knows that everybody gets this at a minimum. And so whatever your issues are, now we can talk about it maybe more fruitfully of why you're down and out at this point in your life. You know, what's your situation? You can go work and be tax-free too. You can go pick up any job. There's none of this going on because the free market's going to determine what low, no skill pay is. And let's just assume that you're kind of low, no skill. You can go work for $6 an hour. But the beauty of it is you're not going to make $7.25 and then pay tax and net $6. You're just going to get paid $6. Because all of those other taxes on your line item aren't going to be there. So you can just go pick up a job and make some money. Go to work. Yes?
What's the poverty line? Is it $30,000 a year?
It depends. It's $23,000, I think, for a family of 4. And it kind of depends on your area. But the federal poverty rate, I think, it might be a little higher than that now. So this is basically covering poverty. For an individual, this $10,000 gets you about poverty level of consumption. Yes. Kendra. Yes. But we're kind of giving them, if you want to think about it this way, if they work 1 hour, they made $6 plus $10,000. The $10,000 is per year. Per year.
So when?
Forever. This is the way it works.
Until they, why would they not working?
It doesn't matter. You don't have to work for it. Everybody gets this. That's of working age. Everybody gets the $10,000. Jordan. Yes. Yes. I think they had it at 15 or 16. Yes.
Maybe teach people to be able to take care of their money a little better.
Yeah. Wouldn't it be? I mean, you start to let this simmer into you a little bit, and you're like, wow, wouldn't the world be maybe a better place if we had something?
Where did you say all the money came from? Did the stuff on the bottom cover what everyone else did?
Yes, and I think it's actually going to be a little bit more expensive, but the idea would be, how much of a better place would the world be if we had this? There's going to be some work effects that now people don't have that cliff effect that I was just telling you about. Remember where they're going to lose their benefits if they work? That's gone. And so that we'd have more people working, more economic activity. We go to the back, yeah. Do you ever cut them off? No. You get this till you die. So this replaces Social Security. No more Social Security system. What if you're in jail? What if you're in jail? Not sure about that one, honestly. I think the jail system would substitute. Your 10 would probably go for jail. So you wouldn't get it. It would be for sure the way they did it.
How often do you get this 10,000?
Would places raise their prices knowing that people are getting more money? I'd say no, due to competition. Competition among companies, remember, keeps it at a fair profit level. So there wouldn't be some sort of price effect that I would expect. Here's this.
Money comes from the taxes of people that make over.
Yes, exactly. So if you make $100,000 a year, the $70,000, the first 30 is free for everybody, Bill Gates and everybody, right? But if you make $100,000 a year, then you're still going to have a tax bill on that 70. Yes.
Tax on how much
Yes, it would still be an income tax under this plan. It's not the fair tax like we did before, although that would be awesome too. But so this is a little bit different thing.
So would the taxes be greater?
Would there be?
Like there'd be more tax to try to.
Yeah.
That's totally driven by the tax rates. So I can't answer that without estimating, you know, what that tax rate's going to be on that additional 70. You see what I mean? So that would be part of the. I'll send you guys out an email on this. You should read it. We got evaluations. So last thing before you go, I've got pencils up here. If people need, I'll come around with pencils here. Let me just start getting these out. It does have to be a pencil for this. So computer red deal. I do have pencils. So I'll come around if I'll put the my name and the course number. You want to just walk those pencils down the middle? Oh, you're not here with them?
Yeah, I can.
Okay. All right. The course number is ECO 20263. ECO 20263, and my name is McCullough, McCullough. Kind of written in between supply and demand curve there. Paige, I'll have you collect these at the end. If you would. He gets paid for it, so I don't feel like that. Okay, and then just slide them in here when you're done. There is a place for comments on the back too. So if you guys want to make any comments about things, we get those as well. I will get out in the hallway. Oops, let me stop this recording.